At Ring, we reinvented the doorbell. And now we're changing the way you look at whole home protection with Ring security cameras.
Wait, Ring does cameras too?
That's right. And they're so versatile, you can put them inside or outside, wherever you need them most.
Handy.
Ring cameras let you see, hear and speak to anyone inside or outside your home. And you can control them all from the Ring app to keep you and your family connected and protected.
Now that is smart.
Ring. Smart security made simple. Learn more at ring.com.
Already have a podcast? It's time to join Spreaker's monetization program, the easiest way to profit from your passion starting on day one. You decide which episodes and exactly where you want the ads to be inserted, and Spreaker takes care of the rest. If you're not on Spreaker, it's easy to import your podcast in just a few clicks, and then you can monetize your older episodes too. For one free month on a pro account, visit Spreaker.com/monetize. That's SPREAKER.com/monetize to join and start making money today.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the PA UK network. I'm your host Paul Rook, and as always we are joined by the stupendous Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements.
Still
Hello,
stupendous.
We're still up there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I like to be stupendous.
Yeah. Absolutely. So how have you been this week?
Yeah, I've got a cold. Just a cold, everybody. That's why I was coughing so much.
Barclays app features help me manage my money and see where it's going. Now I've got that all-seeing feeling. I can see all my upcoming scheduled payments so I can plan ahead. See exactly when and where I spend my money so I know what types of things I'm spending it on. And compare my monthly balances so I can see my every move. Get the all-seeing feeling for yourself with money management features in the Barclays app. Make money work for you. Barclays. You need to be 16 or over to use the Barclays app. T's and C's apply.
Much last week. But yeah, it's come out into a lovely head cold. We love a head cold. So I'm a bit snotty still, but I'll try and keep my coughing and my snotting to a minimum.
Well, we've got her in the spare studio next door.
That's okay, because I've got an antivirus on my laptop, so I'm covered.
Honestly, I feel like I've got the plague, and I daren't go out at the moment because, like, it is only a cold. I know it is only a cold, but it is one of those times, isn't it, where you're thinking, the minute you cough, you feel like weird about it anyway. So, like, I've just been staying in and just hiding from the world.
And the last thing you need is sort of going around the supermarket having a sneezing fit and everyone turning around looking at you. I mean, that's happened to me a few times, especially with the masks on.
That's the best way to clear the supermarket and get your own.
Well, I know. It's been never have I been more conscious of having a common cold, in all honesty. But it's given me plenty of time to play with lots of pretty crystals and write a blog. I've actually written another blog that's coming soon. And you wrote a blog this week, didn't you, Paul?
I did, yeah. I wrote, because of last week's show, it was on the MUFON.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd look into the history of the MUFON and just give people a good idea what it is and what it does and stuff like that. So, I looked into it, put the history all together and shared the blog out. It went out last Friday.
It did. It's led you down a little bit of a rabbit hole with ufology world, hasn't it? Because you came across a case that interested you quite a lot.
Well, yeah, it was... After our chat last week with Chris, he said that it's very hard to investigate a UFO case because there's no physical evidence. And I just happened to watch one of these UFO programs, like Ancient Alien type thing, on the TV. And it actually said that there is one case that has physical evidence. And it was from Scotland, and it's been investigated by the police. and obviously they've taken forensics and stuff like that. And it was it's known as the Robert Taylor incident. And basically, he claims to have seen a dome-type UFO, which released 2 spheres with tentacles coming out of it. And apparently it grabbed hold of him and pulled him to the ground or something. And he woke up about 20 minutes later, from what I remember. And because his daughter then told him to go to the hospital because of his injuries, the police investigated it at a common assault. So they have actually got physical evidence of this UFO case. And one of the names of the people that associated with the case is our guest tonight.
Exactly. Now, we wanted to delve into this a bit more, so we've asked a good friend of ours, Mr. Malcolm Robinson, who is an absolutely amazing researcher, author, speaker. There's so many books you can get to do with Malcolm. We've got him on for the whole show because he's just so prolific and researched that we just had to get him on, particularly when we're looking at things like this, because this guy leaves no stone unturned. So we'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Malcolm Robinson. Hello.
Hello there. A very good evening to you, Kerry, Paul and Richard. It's nice to be on your show.
No problem.
You're more than welcome. Looking forward to this one.
Very much so. Now, you're also a part of Outer Limits magazine, aren't you, as well?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm the assistant editor of the wonderful Outer Limits magazine, more or less put together by Chris Evers, a lovely chap. And, of course, Chris does all the conferences in Hull, the OLM conferences, which we're hoping is going to transpire next year. It was sadly postponed this year due to COVID, but we're hoping to reassemble and put on a wonderful show for everyone next year, 2021.
Oh, fingers crossed, all the events that we're hoping to get to this year will be able to be done again next year. And there's just hope that is the case, because it's affected your own personal events as well this year, and I know that's taken a hit for you. But let's get into this. It's called the Deckmont Woods UFO incident, isn't it, that we're talking about a little bit here?
Yeah, that's correct. It's one of the biggest UFO cases, certainly in Scotland. And for me personally, it was one of the biggest cases that I've been involved with. And it happened way back at the very beginning of my ufological career. And you're talking 1979, Kerry. So that was probably before you were born,
Unfortunately, it wasn't. I was born. I was quite young, but I was born.
I think I was
Thank you
2.
for the compliment.
Yeah. I think it was 2 then, so I'm all right.
Yes, well, I think I was probably about 18 or 19 years of age myself, and it's a very big case. I'll try and be brief. But on the morning of November the 9th, 1979, forestry worker Robert Taylor, who was employed by the Livingston Development Corporation in the forestry department, he jumped into his pickup truck. He was accompanied on the journey to Deckmont Woods by his Irish red setter dog Lara, beautiful dog. And they drove up to the woods. They alighted out of the truck. They walked down a forestry ride. Now, this was a job that Robert Taylor has done for many years, and that consisted of ensuring that no cattle or sheep strayed into the woods, amongst many other things. So it was a very mundane job, and Robert, as a man, had no interest whatsoever in UFOs. It was the furthest thing from his mind. I mean, he's heard about it in the television and newspapers like we all have, but, he was a man who had no interest. All that changed on the morning of November the 9th, 1979. For as Robert was walking down this forestry path, it entered into a small clearing in the woods, a gently sloping field, very small, and he was absolutely gobsmacked. He stood transfixed, looking at this large dome-shaped object with a flange going around its circular perimeter, with these cross-like projections sticking up out of the flange. And he's standing, looking at this. He couldn't believe what he's seeing. And then parts of it disappeared. Then it would re-solidify, then disappear again. Then you could see through it, then it would solidify again. And his dog was barking very ferociously at this scene which was unfolding in front of them. Now, at this point, this is where things started to get a wee bit strange, because at this point, what resembled 2 Second World War sea mines, those bobbing mines you got in the North Atlantic in the shipping lanes to destroy, ships, of course, a spherical ball with projections. 2 of them fell down from beneath this hovering object. It was about 20, 30 feet hovering above the grassy slope, impacted on the grass and started to roll across the grass, making a kind of sucking or plopping noise as it did so, then stopped and extended these rod-like projections towards Mr. Taylor, grabbing him very, very forcibly at both hips, then started to pull him towards this larger object. And at this point, Mr. Taylor remembers a horrible burning smell, like burning brake linings, if you've just applied the brakes very sharpish, And then he heard a swishing sound, as if you had an old school cane and just swished it through the air, and then bang, he lost consciousness. And when he regained consciousness, he observed that the larger object was gone, the smaller objects were gone. There were over 40 holes or indentations, circular, triangular. There were track-like marks left in the soft soil. And he was very, very disorientated, as I'm sure you can imagine. And his jersey was muddy, his trousers were muddy, and his trousers were torn at both hips, which we'll come back to in a moment. He staggered back to his pickup truck, which was further in the forest, and he tried to radio base, but he just couldn't speak. He had lost his voice, he had a terrible thirst, he had a pounding headache, and then he tried to get into the Jeep and then move it up the forestry ride, but he somehow reversed it and stuck in a ditch, so he had to leave it, and he staggered back to his home in Deans. Deans is a small village adjacent to Deafmont Woods, and when his wife saw him, she went, "What the bloody hell has happened to you?" She looked at her husband, and he was in a sorrowful state, the nasty graze on his forehead, on his chin, and his trousers all dirty. And he said those immortal words. It sounds funny, but this is what he said. He said, "I've been attacked." "Pardon?" "I've been attacked." And then his wife went, "With what? With men?" He says, "No," he says, "with a spaceship thing." And she said, "Look, come in the house. There are no such things as a spaceship. Come in the house." And she then phoned his doctor. The local GP attended Robert Taylor in the house, checked his heart, his respiratory system, etc. Other than very agitated and a pounding headache, he was pretty much okay. But having said that, they did say, "Look, you'd better go to the nearby Bangor Hospital just to get a wee bit more, a more checkup, if you like." So he went to the hospital. He was sitting waiting an hour, sitting waiting 2 hours, and nobody came near him. So he just got fed up with it, went home and discharged himself. But this time, Malcolm Drummond, that's Robert Taylor's boss, phoned the police. The police became involved. They went up to the locale. They clearly saw the marks in the grass. Yeah, there's no denying there's something here. And they treated it as an assault by person or persons unknown. And, there was a full-blown investigation into that case. And I've only scratched the surface of what transpired after that, yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating. It has been suggested that Robert had an epileptic fit.
Yes, it has. There's about a dozen or so explanations and theories to explain what could have transpired to Robert Taylor, one of which, as you quite rightly said, Kerry, is an epileptic fit. He had no history of epilepsy either with him or any members of his family. And but with an epileptic fit, you can kind of see things that probably are not there. Some people have suggested that Mr. Taylor, ingested what's known as Atropa belladonna. Now, that's a poisonous berry that sometimes grows in various forests and woods throughout the UK. Now, I checked with the Forestry Commission, and there's no such plant called Atropa belladonna being in Decmant Woods, because if you ingested Atropa belladonna berries in small pieces, that could induce hallucinations. Even if you rub it into your skin on your hands, it can cause hallucinations, but there were nothing like that in Decmant Woods.
And Mr. Taylor himself is actually quite knowledgeable, isn't he, about flora and fauna in the area. So he would have known to avoid that anyway, if that was the case. So that's kind of not really a great explanation. So, like, when they went to the site and you said that there were indentations in the grass and stuff like that, was that could possibly have been caused by a more rational explanation, do you not think?
Absolutely, and like any investigation, you have to be very careful and dot the I's and cross the T's. Another researcher by the name of Stuart Campbell was one of the main researchers on that case just prior to myself being involved. Stuart, as anybody knows in UFO land, is an ardent skeptic. You know, you show him a piece of white paper and he says it's black. But we need them. We need skeptics. We need to see the other side of the coin. He felt like a lot of people felt that maybe the Forestry Commission was undertaking some work in that piece of land, so the laying of pipes, etc. So he checked with the Forestry Commission and the Livingston Development Corporation. There were indeed some work being undertaken in Decmant Woods, but not at that site. Now, you can speculate that workmen maybe said, well, we'll just move these pipes and stuff over here. Nobody will know. It's a possibility. But we have to bear in mind that Robert Taylor was, as you said, he's an educated man. And to his dying day, he said, Malcolm, how I wish not only my dog could talk, but you were there as well to see this. And this is a sad thing, because for every person that sees a UFO, there might be 3 or 4 people behind them who also saw that, but won't come forward for fear of ridicule. So he did very well to come forward. He really did.
Is Decmant Wood like a managed sort of woodland? Is it sort of harvested for timber? Is it like a pine wood, or is it sort of like a natural old wood?
Well, it's obviously been there through millennia, and it's gradually been chipped away by deforestation simply because of people building houses, etc. Mm-hmm. There's a golf course adjacent to Decmant Woods, and incredibly, it sits maybe 200 yards away from the busy M8 motorway, which astrides Decmant Woods, and that carries a lot of traffic in and out of Edinburgh. And people have quite rightly said, what on earth would if it was a machine from another world, come down in full view of a motorway into the woods? But there's many ways you can look at that. It doesn't need to come down from the sky. It could have just instantly appeared. The dematerialization of that craft is very, very similar to worldwide UFO reports.
Yes, it's certainly like what you was explaining earlier when Robert was actually witnessing it. It seemed to be fading in and out as if trying to cross some sort of realm, or from another dimension perhaps, or something like that. It certainly seems to have that quality to it.
It certainly does, and getting back to the police investigation, a full-blown investigation was undertaken. Mr. Taylor's trousers, his jersey, his vest, his long johns was sent to the police forensic department in Bathgate and also in Edinburgh. And they undertook various tests to determine what could have caused the rips in these trousers, because the trousers that Robert wore on that day was heavy-duty serge material, very, very tough trousers, And Lester Knibb, who was the chief forensic chap at Lothian Borders Police, he says, Malcolm, he says, these trousers were ripped in an upwards manner, a mechanical manner. These trousers, Malcolm, was not ripped by any forest debris, sharp stones, sharp twigs, or even a barbed wire fence. I haven't an explanation, he said to me, but clearly these were ripped in an upwards manner. And that is consistent with the testimony of Robert when he said that these spherical balls with the spikes stopped and extended these rods and pulled them in that upwards manner. And if that's a hallucination, it's a bloody good one.
So there was no doubt in the police's mind when they looked at this, they were actually looking at some sort of physical assault. They were 100% convinced about this.
Yeah, absolutely correct. I mean, I've interviewed a number of the police officers on that case. They're featured in my book. Here's a wee plug: The Desmond Woods Incident on Amazon, folks.
Yeah.
And,
Plug away.
And I spoke to Detective Sergeant Ian Wark, and he was mystified. He said, Malcolm, when I went to Desmond Woods, he said to me, I thought it was just a load of nonsense, but I couldn't believe how many officers were involved. He says it was like a full-blown murder scene. He says, I've never, ever seen so many forensic people and police officers together at one site. And then I knew that, hey, maybe we have got something on here. And his own interpretation, he knows Robert Taylor. He's had a pint with him. He's been in the bowling club with him. He says, Malcolm, seriously, you'll never, ever meet a more down-to-earth guy than Robert Taylor. There's no airs and graces, doesn't want on the telly, doesn't want on the radio. And so he actually knew him from, going to the local Dean's Bowling Club as well.
Paul, did you want to say something at this point?
See, that what intrigued me the most, I know that obviously there's a lot of theories to try and explain what happened to the guy, but it just, every theory that comes out only explains a little part of it. It can't tie it all together and come up with a conclusion other than it actually obviously happened. They've got the physical evidence. And, as soon as we get first contact with these little green alien people, they're going to be nicked.
They've got a few questions to answer.
Yeah.
But what interests me, is there any sort of thought in your mind that the police may have been acting under a third party to investigate this as well?
Very, very, very good question. The plain and simple answer to that is I truly don't know. If we were in America, a lot of American ufologists would probably say yes to that. We're more conservative here in the UK. There's no denying that. I mean, I do believe that the police didn't. They like me. They wanted to know what was going on, and so many different theories, as I say, to explain this. The thing is, guys, that if a normal answer comes forward to explain the Desmond Woods incident, I will be the first to put my hands up and tell everybody, because the fact remains, although I firmly believe that we're being visited by machines not of this earth, I still am prepared to kick back sides and find out and pull the wool over people's eyes to find out who's telling the truth, who's not. It's my job to unmask hoaxers and fakers and wishful thinking, guys. But at the moment, it's my contention, it's my belief that what Robert Taylor saw was not from this planet. He didn't eat berries, he didn't have a seizure or anything like that. It truly was a mystifying event. And let's not forget, we were probably the first in the UK to erect a stone cairn back in 1993 with a plaque to commemorate that site. And then in the last year or so, I fought tirelessly with the West Lothian Council to get some signage placed in the woods, because we know what the signage is at Rendlesham. You've got marker posts, you've got this big display boards. Well, I wanted that in Desmond Woods, and it took me about 2 years arm wrestling with West Lothian Council to eventually get that done. So, if you go there today, you'll see all these signposts, and there's a board at the site. And the reason we did that, guys, is simply that many people come up from England and Ireland and other parts of the world, and they can't find it. It's such a still quite a big forest, and you different, and thankfully they can now find it.
Well, we certainly know what it's like. Even we've been around in Rendlesham Forest, and it took us a little while, didn't it, guys, to find where we should have been. But
even
we got
with
there.
the signposts, we took the long route. Is all I'm saying on that one.
That's right.
What when you first hit this case, when you first stepped into this case, what was your initial thoughts? Did you think, we'll just see what happens or see what's said, and then you became more believing as you went on, or did you walk into it with like a belief system there?
A good question again, Kerry. To answer that question, I'll just slightly lead up to that and then give you that answer.
Okay.
For me as a person, as an individual, I've always had this deep-held fascination for all things weird and wonderful. When I was growing up, I bought the books of Arthur C. Clarke and Eric Van Daniken and the ghost story books, and I went, nah, there can't be any truth in all this. It's rubbish. There's no such things as UFOs. And I was a skeptic, an ardent skeptic. And in 1979, the year of the Deckman case, I started my journey, before I heard about that case, to try and expose all these nonsense. How wrong was I? How wrong was I? Now, let us not forget, 95% of UFO reports can be explained. We're only speaking about a small 5%. But to answer your question, so there I was, growing up in this wonderful imagery of UFOs, ghosts, poltergeists, Nessie, you name it. I really was on the boil with all this stuff. I found it fascinating. And here, suddenly, was this big case in front of me. And I went up there 50-50. I went up there excited, interested. And when I got to inside Mr. Taylor's home, we had arranged to meet with him. And when I got to his house was awash with journalists. And he shoved them all away and he says, I just want to speak to this young guy, Malcolm Robinson. Leave me alone just now, Malcolm. Yes, sit down. I'll tell you what. And we sat there and I realised there and then, wait a minute, come on now. This guy's he's telling the truth. I know he's telling the truth. And having said that, people can lie under oath. People can lie and manage to outwit a lie detector test. You can control your body to make the correct pulses where you can tell the truth or not and the non-truth. But speaking to Robert personally, then we took him up to Deckman Woods and he was showing us the marks in the grass, and we were there that day with a famous author and researcher, a guy called Andrew Collins. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, I know Andrew.
Yeah, we know Andrew, yeah.
Well, Andrew was there as well, and we spoke to Andrew about the case. And so, yeah, I mean, I was there 50-50 to answer your question, Kerry. I just was a wee bit bemused, but to be there. And the night, I was there the day after, and the day after, snow had fallen during the evening. So by the time we got up there, Andrew Collins had moved the snow away from the landing area, and you could clearly see the marks in the grass. Andrew was working for Bufora, which is the British UFO Research Association, and he did a plaster of Paris mould of some of the indentations. I took photographs, cine film, that's what I had in 1979, a wee cine camera, And so it was great to be there, and you could hear the soft rumble of the traffic 200 yards away, traversing down the M8 motorway. But just to be there and the quietness of the woods with that soft rumbling in the background and looking at these marks in the grass with Robert Taylor there talking again about what he saw, it was outstanding. It really was. And God bless him, he's no longer with us, sadly. I gave a lecture in Dean's last year to do with this case for the local people, and it was absolutely packed to the gunnels. We had to turn over 50 people away from the door.
Oh, wow.
And we broke every health and safety record because there were people on the edge, standing up at the side of the hall and lying on the floor, and there were way too many people in the hall. I could have been jailed myself, never mind anybody else.
Was there any other witnesses to this other than just the guy that it happened to?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. Not there in the woods, but certainly on the motorway and surrounding areas. Now, what happened was and it's all written in my book, The Deckman Woods Incident, various witnesses about 2 to 3 to 4 miles adjacent to Deckman Woods saw a strange craft in the air, which was clearly not an aircraft, a helicopter, or anything of that description. Just recently, in point of fact, one chap said to me he actually saw something coming down into the woods, a kind of circular oval type grey mass coming down. So I'm still, working on that one, talking to the witness. And that was on the same morning, And so, yeah, to answer your question, there were a number of people who saw something in that area at that time, which backs up, thankfully, the testimony of Robert.
Yeah, it seems that you got involved pretty soon after the incident actually happened. I mean, and what was the time frame? You know, were you there a week afterwards or so? Or?
No, I think it was only a couple of days tops. It was in the evening news. It was in one of the evening newspapers, and I just knew that I had to get there immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe if it wasn't the following day, it was certainly the next day thereafter. My memory's going a bit. But
Tell us about it.
I was there 2 days.
What did the police conclude in regards to the tracks that were left?
Yeah, again, the tracks, I mean, they look like those kind of boards you would get in building sites. Now, if you turn them upside down, you know, you've got a big broad board with struts on it. And some people have said it's like tank tracks, you know, in a sense. So you've just got these lines. And they felt that there were some machinery had been in that area from the Livingston Development Corporation. So Stuart Campbell, along with Detective Sergeant Wark, went down to the West Lothian Council, and they checked the machinery there, and none of the machinery track marks matched anything that was found in Decmont Woods. So just to confirm, none of the machinery was in that area at the time, and the machinery they did have in the bays did not correspond. The track marks did not correspond to the tracks on these diggers and machinery.
Yeah, because a lot of the sort of like the sceptical sort of like approach, they do tend to sort of like try and point towards the water board that were working in the area at the time. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. I mean, that was said that the water board was in the area doing some things. I believe, let's be honest here, I believe that they were in Decmont Woods, but not at the times stated. Not at the time stated.
I see.
Fascinating case, but it's not the only case in Scotland that you've investigated. There's in fact, Scotland seems to be a bit of a hotbed for ufology, doesn't it?
It certainly is. I mean, obviously you have the UFO sightings across the Stirlingshire town of Bonnybridge, and obviously you have the A70 case, Scotland's official only official logged UFO abduction case, which is another massive case as well. You've got the Craig Lusker Reservoir photograph, a chap photographed a disc-shaped object. You've got the Pullman Reservoir photograph, and you've got a number of cases throughout Scotland as a nation, which is indicative and similar to many worldwide UFO reports, which, again, it lends credence to this being a global phenomenon.
So what do you think's going on up in Scotland for it to be so prolific with ufology cases? You see, it does seem to be more concentrated, and I speak from a very unknowledgeable perspective here, to be fair, because I'm not, as I've said it time and time again, I'm not that au fait with the ufology world, but it does seem to be a concentration up in Scotland. So what do you think's going on up there?
Well, again, there's a lot of misinterpretation going on up there for sure. And people are looking skywards and seeing what they believe is a UFO, and it's not. It's just a satellite, a small pinprick of white light, the same magnitude of a star, traversing the night sky. And if you didn't know what that was, you'd think that's a UFO. And some satellites rotate depending how they're traversing, and they can spin and reflect lights, like thrown off light, etc., rather than a dull, standard static light. People maybe misinterpret aircraft viewed at an unusual angle, way in the distance with the sunlight striking off the fuselage. They only see the fuselage and not the wings. So as a researcher, we just check to see what was in the air at that time. With any given sighting, we'll check with the police. As any reports came into the local station, we'll check with the major airports in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen. We'll check with smaller provincial airports like Cumbernauld and various other small, purely just to see what could have been in that area at that time. We'll check the local flying clubs with microlights, hang gliders, and of course, back the bane of ufologist life about 5, 6, 7 years ago was, of course, the Chinese lanterns. Thankfully, there are not so much of them these days, but we now have the drones, the nighttime drones with red lights, so that the operators know exactly where they are in the sky. So that we have to ensure that what is natural up there. Now, I've mentioned that stuff. It's still my contention and opinion that Scotland as a nation is definitely dealing with some form of presence traversing the skies of Scotland. I have no idea whatsoever what is behind these sightings as to why. It's a question I get asked all the time, well, why Bonnybridge, we truly don't know. I mean, there's nothing significant in the Stirlingshire area which would glorify an attention from anybody else. We're all well aware of the Minuteman and the big, UFO sightings above silos in America and stuff like that. But there's no silos in that part of central Scotland. So, but there is something going on, yeah.
Do you think this may have something to do with the geology of Scotland? I mean, I've sort of got an impression of Scotland. I've only been there once, but it's all quite mountainous, a lot of sort of like granite and stuff, and a lot of sort of thing has been made about this sort of in the past, especially around this sort of phenomena. Do you think it may have something to do with that?
Yes, to a degree I accept that. I remember being fascinated by a book called Earthlights, written by Paul Devereux.
Yeah, and I know it, yeah.
He was talking about certain parts of the world or certain parts of the country, these balls of plasma light which exudes from beneath the Earth's surface. Now, this is a combination of the movement of tectonic plates, the shifting of quartz crystal, which rubbing together quickly creates this plasma-like ball. It's been seen in the Yakima Indian Reservation in America. It's been seen in Hasdalen in Norway. These balls of light have been, they're not UFO. They look glorious. They look fantastic. But they're purely just an energy from planet Earth itself. And as to, could that be the case in Scotland? Well, with any given sighting, not only do we check with airports, we check the geology of the land where that sighting was, just to see if perhaps it may be some Earth-based phenomena, a natural phenomena, this plasma-like ball. So we take that into consideration, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know I've sort of like reading up on you. I noticed you've done a bit of work around sort of Loch Ness as well, and I believe that is quite a major fault line as well, considering sort of what's been reported from Loch Ness.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because, of course, Loch Ness lies in the Great Glen Fault. And did you know there's quite a number of UFO sightings being seen across and above the Great Glen Fault? In fact, myself, many years ago, when I was doing some research at Loch Ness, interviewing witnesses, we were sharing a campfire at Drumnadrochit on the shores of Loch Ness. And there were French, Belgian, American tourists sitting at a campfire. And it was a lovely, lovely starry night, a blanket of stars across the heavens. And this lady with her back to the loch screamed out, "What the hell's that?" So we all looked in her direction, and across Loch Ness at the other side were these rolling hills. And you could see the silhouette of the edge of the hills in the background. But above that was this circular ball of white light doing beautiful, majestic dances, for want of a better word, moving up and down and very erratically. Straight away, you go into the investigator mode. Is it an aircraft, a helicopter? Is it car headlights illuminating low-lying cloud, spiral dance, a car going up a hill illuminating? But there are no cars at that point. So, and then suddenly it stopped and screamed off into the heavens in a second. And that was just my own. And then, of course, we had Frank Serrell, who is a researcher at Loch Ness, very, very controversial guy. He claimed that's another show entirely. But when I interviewed Frank Serrell, he's no longer with us. But at Foyers, he had a campsite at Foyers, and I asked him about the UFO that swooped down. It was like the classic UFO, the cupola on top, swooped down the loch and came over his campsite, and he managed to get a photograph. In fact, if you go into Google, anybody, Frank Serral UFO. You should find that photograph there. And I started to ask him about that. Well, Frank, thank you for being here today. I want to talk also about the UFO you saw. Right, that's the interview finished. Pardon? I'm not going to speak about that UFO. I'm only going to speak about Nessie, not that. Or the interview's finished. I went, okay. So, but that's another story.
Oh dear. So yeah, you've written a book also on the Loch Ness Monster and the history and the research that you've done into that. Is there a dinosaur living in Loch Ness?
No.
No.
No, he's gone home. He got a UFO to take him home.
There's a lot of people have suggested it's a plesiosaur. There's no way it's a plesiosaur because a plesiosaur didn't have that neck where it could raise out the water and remain in that position for several seconds to a minute. It just didn't do that. What I will say is clearly, without a shadow of a doubt, there is clearly something in excess of 30 feet in Loch Ness. Absolutely. And but that's not a dinosaur as such. It could be some form of mutation. It could be a giant eel, for want of a better word. What you got to remember is in 1987, Operation Deep Scan. That was a flotilla of about 12 boats with the most sophisticated sonar on board at that time, and they swept up and down Loch Ness for a matter of days, and they got between 3 and 6, if I remember correctly, anomalous returns on the sonar, which showed clearly that this was not a group shoal of fish. This was a large object, and the boat had to go back, and it lost the signal, couldn't find it. I've interviewed a number of people at Loch Ness. I've interviewed Father Gregory Brucey. Sadly, he's no longer with us. He was a monk at St Benedictine Abbey in Fort Augustus, and he says, Malcolm, back in 1971, I took the organist of Westminster Cathedral, who was up in Scotland on holiday, took him down to the jetty at Fort Augustus, and he says, Malcolm, the loch, it was like a sheet of glass, not a ripple, beautiful. And then suddenly, as if on cue, this long tapering neck extended from beneath the surface of Loch Ness, thrashed about and just cascaded into a pool of water. And he looked at the organist and he says, God almighty, he says, you're up here for 2 seconds and you've seen Nessie, and I could be here years, and not see it. And again, with any tourists, it's like UFOs to a small degree. Any tourists coming over from New Zealand, Puerto Rico, wherever, they're travelling alongside the Loch Ness in their car, they may see humps. These humps are only caused by different boats traversing north and south. They create this standing wave, which looks like humps in the water. And that's all it is. It's just water. And people take photographs of this and try to say that it's Nessie. And so there's a lot of misperception with Loch Ness as well as UFOs.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that. I've been to Loch Ness once, and we sort of spent a couple of days sort of driving up and down. I was on a skiing holiday, actually, up there. And, and it was winter time, so there's a lot of sort of chop on the water, and it does look odd. I mean, it looks like the current's going one way and things move the other and stuff like that. I mean, I can see why a lot of people sort of get confused with what they're actually seeing. It must be quite easy to misidentify.
Absolutely, but I also interviewed the chap who brought Nessie to the world's attention, and that was water bailiff Alex Campbell. He's obviously no longer with us. Everybody I speak to is no longer with us.
Is there a conspiracy theory here, Malcolm, that we need to worry about?
Oh dear.
You heard it here first.
Check your heartbeats. But he saw Nessie as a young man back in 1934, and he notified the Inverness Courier, and then the Inverness Courier made a big play about it, and since then it's been at the attention of the world. And I was fortunate, as you probably know, to go down in a submarine in Loch Ness in 1994, which is a wonderful experience. It's
really murky, though. Loch Ness is really murky, isn't it? So how was that in the submersible?
It was a great experience. I paid, they were taking members of the public down for 1 hour at £68.50 for the hour, and they were going to use that money to fund the research, because we're doing core samples of the loch floor, just to get some information about the makeup and the soil deposits over the years. It was a 15-foot submarine sponsored by Swatch watches. It had a massive big frontal window, nose cone window, very toughened glass, of course, illuminated by 6 or 7 big halogen lights in the front. And we went down to a depth of, I think it was about 700 feet or so. Now, you're right to a degree, Kerry. It is murky the first 20 feet. And that's caused by the heavy peat-stained particles coming down from the hillside, coming down the little streams, going into the loch. And it's very, very dirty. But once you get past that, and I can say that because I've been there, and the video is on YouTube. Once you get past that, it's crystal clear. Now, we went down to quite a depth, and when we could see from the front nose cone of the submarine the sandy silt deposit, the odd rocks sticking out, and then suddenly, bang, the loch floor just fell away. And I said to the skipper of the submarine, "Oh my God, can we go down there?" He says, "No, we can't. We've got to stick to the allotted course." And we never saw Nessie, unfortunately. People have said, why could that be? And maybe because there were so many bright lights penetrating the inky blackness of Loch Ness at that depth that any fish may have strayed away from that. These light sources coming in. And so therefore they didn't come in there. And I said to the skipper of the submarine, has he seen or heard anything? He says, "Yep, they've picked up some strange noises and stuff from the sonar. They've got reports." And he says even he, as a trained submariner, couldn't explain what these reports were.
So there's something definitely weird going on in that area. Again, it's just this general length of weirdness without actually much evidential proof. But stories keep coming out time and time again about weird stuff happening or something being seen in the loch that they can't explain. And these are rational people. We're not talking like, the batshit crazies. We're talking about rational people. And that's what makes it interesting, is when you get somebody like go back to Robert Taylor, somebody who's very down-to-earth, very rational person, never in a million years would have wanted this kind of attention, coming out and saying that they've had this experience or they've seen something on the loch or, whatever area this comes in, Yeah. It still kind of infuriates me to a degree in this technological age with people having, phone cameras at their disposal, that there not been any more better visual surface photography of Nessie. But what we have to bear in mind is it's an accidental breaking of the water's surface by this creature or creatures, and obviously more than one. They're feeding on the fish population, which is maybe 10, 15, 20 feet below the actual surface. So as they're coming up to feed off these fish, it's breaking surface. And so it's not an air-breathing animal, of course it's not. But these people who live around the loch prefer to put more stock on their stories than visitors, because again, people can be misled. The light and the dark shades and the mood of Loch Ness changes at a drop of a hat. It's incredible. And depending on your elevation, if you're up in the hills looking down, you'll see black patches, like inky black patches, and you think that's maybe at the back of something. Then it just disappears. So it's an environment which, if you haven't been to, you simply must go, because it's absolutely fascinating. It's lovely.
I must admit, I've been there once, and that was for about 20 minutes before I had to get the bus back. But it is a really beautiful place, and it just strikes me that that there's a lot of businesses there that do thrive on tourism.
Yeah.
So maybe I think some of the stories, could possibly be fabricated just to keep the tourists interested.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's levelled against research at Loch Ness, that the tourist industry around the shores of Loch Ness is quite extensive. And people have said, well, they're not making the stories up. That's their source, that's their livelihood. But let's not forget the fact that in Memphis you've got Elvis Boulevard, and they've got wee plastic swinging Elvises and stuff like that. So wherever you go in life, you'll always get the same way with Norway. You'll go into the trolls, these wee mythical things. They've got all wee trolls in the shops and all the rest of it. So, and I don't blame or say anything against that. It's good for the economy, of course it is. But yes, they are maybe taking liberties and just capitalising on the success of Ness, knowing it's a worldwide phenomenon. So yes and no. It's good that they're doing it, but you know.
Okay, it's just enterprising, though, isn't it? To be fair, you're getting all these people coming up on the back of the story of Loch Ness. It's just enterprising to make, I'm not being funny, but if you can sell something to people, then why not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm dying to ask you. Yeah, I'm dying to ask you. The $1 million sort of question here. What do you think's going on at Loch Ness? What do you think it is, or maybe, or it isn't?
Well, it's not a sturgeon fish. A large sturgeon fish can grow up between 12 foot to 17 and even 20 feet long. It's got a hard, bristly back, bony kind of back with a big snout. I don't think that, and people have suggested that's what Nessie is. It's a sturgeon. Adrian Shine, one of the most famous Loch Ness monster researchers, thinks it possibly could be that as well. I think it's probably a mutated large eel. And with some of the photographs I've seen over the years of this eel-like thing just coming out the water, it may be that. And let's not forget that Scotland as a nation is not just Loch Ness. We have Loch Morar to the west of Scotland. It's only 11 miles long, but it's... what I should say about Ness, you can get... Did you know you can get the world's population 3.5 times in Loch Ness? Now, whoever made that stat up, that's wonderful, but I always remember that. How does he know that? But that's what he said. But in Loch Morar, they call it Morag. It's got its own name. And SPI, that's the name of their research group, Strange Phenomena Investigations. Way back in 1990, we undertook a week's expedition up there. We trained our binoculars on the loch. We went out in a rowing boat. We did this, we did that. And we never came up with anything, unfortunately. But, Scotland has got a history of, they call it the water horse or a kelpie. That's another word for a monster. And we have all these various things. So it's just... Every country has it, England, Norway, Sweden, America, etc.
There seems to be a particular sort of phenomenon, sort of more or less sort of stuck to the far north, because if I gather that if you move across into Scandinavia, they have a few of these sort of lake monster sort of stories attached to some of their lakes, and they seem to be on the same sort of latitude. Do you think that may have some sort of connection to it?
I don't really know. I mean, you're clearly correct. In those countries, you've got Ogopogo, you've got in Lake Champlain, you've got all these various creatures as well. Possibly. I mean, what I can say, getting back to Loch Ness, is, and it's been bandied about that maybe there's subterranean channels or waterways or tunnels leading from Ness to the ocean, and I doubt that very much. I mean, when we did some side scan sonar. Not me personally, of course, but the professors went out from America back in 1972 and 75. They did the Klein side scan sonar of the loch sides, and it came in at an angle. It came in like, it wasn't just straight down. There is no subterranean channels that they saw at that time. So I don't believe there's anything leading out to the sea and things coming in, because you have to bear in mind Loch Ness is just water. It's not like the North Sea, salt, etc. It's a freshwater loch, is Loch Ness.
So it wasn't an elephant then.
Well, you know what? I mean, back in the 30s, there was a travelling circus came up from England or somewhere, and they were going on the way to Inverness, and they had elephants, and they went to a certain part of Loch Ness, and some of the elephants went in for a wee dip, And somebody, at that time in the 30s, not a lot of people had seen elephants. So somebody on the other side of the shore saw this big trunk coming out the water and says, "That's a monster." And of course, it was only elephants. And yeah, it's just one of these stories that I've remembered, yeah.
There seems to be a...
Oh, sorry, Paul. Sorry, Richard. I was actually going to say to Paul, I thought he was always making that story up, but clearly he wasn't.
See? I do know what I'm talking about. Sometimes.
Certainly the heyday of Loch Ness, I think, particularly with sightings and stuff, was the sort of 60s into the 1970s. You had a lot of people spend a lot of time actually researching that loch. Is there still that amount of interest sort of going on around the shores of Loch Ness today?
Just on a smaller scale. I mean, the interest is still there, but yeah, it's definitely scaled down. It did have its heydays in the 70s and 80s, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau set up their caravans. They had the big telephoto lenses. They scoured the loch, and you had various expeditions. You had people coming up from all over the world to do their own thing. You have a gentleman up there just now, Steve Feltham, who holds the world records for sitting in his caravan looking at Ness for over 10, 15 years, I think it is now he's done that, if not more. So you have these hardcore residue of individuals, and how I wish I could be one of them myself and get away from Hastings and just spend my life looking for Nessie. It would be wonderful.
There is also another theory that it's something to do with Aleister Crowley and Boleskine House that's on one of the edges of the loch. What do you make of that? Have you heard of that one? This seems to be a newer theory.
Yeah. I mean, Aleister Crowley, he was dubbed the world's murderous man, but evil, the world's most evil man. That was ascribed to him by somebody. He did indeed have a house on the shores of Loch Ness. It was called Boleskine House. It burnt down 2 or 3 years ago, but I believe that they've rebuilt it. But whilst Aleister Crowley had it, he did a number of ceremonies conjuring up devils and demons, etc. And in point of fact, he actually died here in where I'm living just now in Hastings. He died some years ago. But people have said, well, could it not have been Aleister Crowley whilst conjuring up all these evil spirits and demons? Somehow something escaped and maybe it went into the loch. While some people would say that would be the case, you have to remember that Nessie has been seen through the centuries, way, way, way before Aleister Crowley came on the scene. And so I certainly don't think that Crowley had anything to do with that. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he was aware of it. Like anybody who lives in the Loch side, he would be aware of the stories about Nessie, for sure, yeah.
It's a fascinating concept, whatever way you want to look at it. We've actually come to the end of the first show, boys and girls. I can't believe how quick that's gone. When we come back after the break, we're going to delve more into the paranormal side of things, because not only is Malcolm well-versed in the ufology and cryptozoology world, he's also incredibly well-researched in regards to the paranormal. So join us back straight after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK radio network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. Now, before the break, we were heavily into the ufology and cryptozoology world, and we're going to hit into the paranormal side of things. Because Malcolm has literally just released a new book called The Sauchie Poltergeist. Have I said that right, Malcolm?
No, it's actually Sauchie. So if you break it up in S-A-W, then Key, K-E-Y, Sauchie. It's just That's how you pronounce it.
Okay, so for my Essex tones, I'll say it's Sauchie.
You got it, Kerry. That's
Hey!
it.
Now, this is coming up to its 60th anniversary, isn't it? And it should be up there with the Enfield Poltergeist haunting, really, shouldn't it? And the Pontefract as well, really.
Yeah, I mean, Enfield, Pontefract, South Shields, a great case written by Darren Ritson and Mike Halliwell. Fantastic poltergeist cases, and Sauchie, certainly the Sauchie case is the best documented case in Scotland, without a shadow of a doubt, simply because of the validity of the witnesses. We have Church of Scotland ministers, we have 3 local GPs who saw that, we had a school teacher, all credible witnesses who saw with their own eyes mysterious things happening,
Now, this did focus on a young teenage girl, Virginia Campbell, is that right?
That's correct, yes, that's right.
Now, quite often with poltergeist cases, they say that it focuses on a young teenage girl, doesn't it? It doesn't always hold true when you look into cases, but it does tend to be a focus of a young teenage girl. Now, Virginia Campbell, we don't know where she is today, do we, to be able to talk to her today about her experiences as a child?
Yes and no. I mean, with doing the research for my book, the Sauchie case on the Sauchie Poltergeist, we managed to track her down to Kempsted, a small town called Kempsted, which is near Bedford. Sadly, that's as far as we got. We just couldn't find out where in Kempsted, but we certainly know 100% that's where she is. And how I would have loved to have ended my book on the Sauchie Poltergeist with an interview with Virginia, just to get her 2020 analysis, for want of a better word, of what she experienced, But we've got all the facts and figures in the book. It's all there. But yeah, it would have been great to get Virginia to tell her tale in 2020.
But we have got, like you said, witness statements from people that experienced this, that surrounded this poor girl. Give us a quick rundown of the case itself.
Well, very briefly, the Campbell family, they originally were based in a small village community called Moville, which is based in County Donegal in Ireland. And Virginia and her mother was called Annie, they came over to Sauchie in October 1960 and to live with Virginia's mother's brother named Thomas and his wife Isabella and their children, Margaret, she was aged 9, and Derek, aged 6. Now, the husband, Virginia Campbell's father, remained back in Moville to sell the family farm. He did come over to Sauchie sometime later, but he was over there. Virginia didn't want to come to Scotland. And her friends were there. She had a wee dog called Toby, which she loved that dog. It was going to be left over with her father. And so she really wasn't keen to come over to Scotland at that time. The first bizarre events unfolded on November the 22nd in 1960. And what transpired, Kerry, was that Virginia and her sister Margaret, they were in bed and suddenly they heard like scratching noises from beneath the bed. And they thought initially maybe it's just a mouse or hopefully not a rat. And then there was these bangings on the headboard. It was thumping. They jumped out of the bed, ran down the stairs. And as they ran down the stairs, behind them was a sound similar to if you had a big medicine ball. These things you got back in the 1960s. Thump, 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 thumping down on each stair as they down the stairs. Both girls rushed into the living room and said there was something strange happening in their bedroom. They just weren't believed, they weren't believed, and they said, look, get back to bed, there's nothing there. So Thomas and Virginia's mother took them back into bed, put the girls in the same bed together, and then suddenly, bang, 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 the headboard started vibrating and moving and about, and they went, oh my God, yes, we believe you. What's going on here? So they moved Margaret out of that bed, young Margaret, and put her in the room next door, and then put Virginia in the room next door as well. bang, 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 it's still unfolded there as well. So that was the kind of the start of it back in November the 22nd. Of course, it didn't end like that. Virginia was kept off school because she was quite nervous. And then when she was in the living room, there was a sideboard, a large, long sideboard, suddenly moved about five inches from the wall, moved into the living room and moved back again. And then that night, more bangings and knockings were heard from Virginia's bed. And so we believe, even by the next door neighbours, they complained about the bangings and noises, you know. So clearly the family realised, wait a minute. Now, what on earth is going on here? It's not the girls fooling around. We've checked all that. Is it something supernatural? Is it something weird, mysterious? So they decided to seek the services of the local reverend, a chap called T.W. Lund, a man of the cloth. And he himself saw the headboard rocking back and forward, moving and bangings coming from that. There were rippling effects on the girls' bed covers on the bed, as if you threw a stone into a quiet mill pond. You know the ripples you get when you throw a stone? The bed covers were rippling up and down in Virginia's bed. So, again, what they had to do was they called for the services of Dr. William Logan, the local GP, who had attended the house in October, just a route because they had moved to Scotland. They were just doing, the tests. And his first evening there, attending to young Virginia, he saw the head bedstead moving as well, and the knockings and bangings. He actually grabbed it to try and stop it from moving. And as he did so, there was a linen chest, a large linen chest that kept all the external bed covers and pillows. You used to get them back in the 1960s, quite long, events. Suddenly, the lid of that big linen chest started to rise up of its own accord and bang, 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 move up and down of its own accord, banging the framework of this linen chest, and it moved into the middle of the bedroom and moved back again as well. So he was astonished at that. He couldn't believe that, what he was looking at, And it was that at that point they decided to get other ministers involved, church ministers, who again saw that. But probably the most alarming and disturbing events transpired not in the family home, but in the school, the local school. So what happened there was that Virginia, it's a brand new school. Of course, she's come over from Ireland. She's trying to settle in. She's trying to make friends with the boys and the girls. And back in the 1960s, you won't recall this, but it was larger classrooms. You had upwards of 40, 50 kids in a class back in those days. And so the teacher had given the classroom some work to do. So all the little children, their heads are bent over their jotters, are writing away apart from one person, and that was Virginia Campbell. So the teacher's looking at the classroom and says, everybody's all writing away apart from Virginia. Virginia had her forearms pushing down on the top of her desk lid. And the teacher screamed, "What are you doing? Stop that at once, Virginia, stop it." So as soon as Virginia released her forearms from the desk lid started flapping up and down and up and down. And then at that point, an empty desk, I should say, next to Virginia rose up into the air several inches and went back again. And at that point, the whole class screamed and ran out the door. But another occasion that happened in the school was when Virginia went to the teacher. Of course, the teacher's right at the front of the class. Back in 1960, it was a big, big, heavy oak table with a cane pointer lying flat on the table. Big blackboard on the wall. Virginia walked slowly up to the teacher, Margaret Stewart, with her essay, with her jotter, and placed it down on the desk, the teacher's desk. And at that point, the cane, which was lying flat on the table, started to vibrate. Then it stood up on end and started thumping down on the table. And then at this point, the teacher's heavy oak table started to rise a few centimetres off the floor. Now, look at this. The teacher's stomach was in the front, the long part of the desk. The desk totally revolved around 90 degrees. And the teacher's stomach was then facing the narrow end of the desk. And again, at that point, all the school kids ran through the door like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, and they all getting stuck in the door. And again, at that point, there was a bowl of bulbs, flower bulbs, just screamed off somebody's table and smashed into the wall. So there was quite a lot going on there at the time,
It's all these pieces of furniture you've outlined are very heavy pieces of furniture, particularly back in those days. They would have been heavy, solid wood objects, even the desk that Virginia had at the school. Now, a lot of theory is put upon an external manifestation of an internal process, basically telekinesis kind of thing, unconsciously done. For such a young little girl, because she wasn't a big girl, was she? This is an extraordinary amount of power and energy that's being transmitted, if that's the case, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of theories to explain the poltergeist. Recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, ley lines, energy lines, hallucinations, attention-seeking. But the main one, which you're alluding to there, Kerry, is the sexual energy exuding from young girls going through puberty, etc. I do not accept that as an explanation, an external explanation to account for any given poltergeist effect, because if that was the case, then you would be having poltergeist effects up and down the United Kingdom with all this sexual frustration energy with teenagers. There'd be things falling off the walls and everything, So,
I well imagine, yeah.
So I don't personally, and I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not an expert. The media say I'm an expert. I'm not an expert. Far from it. I know nothing. But that's my take on it. But also what we have to remember is that when the doctors attended young Virginia in her bed, she was very distressed. Another two things happened as well. The pillow next to Virginia was lying in bed, her head was on the pillow, depressed. There was a secondary invisible head depressed into the fabric of the second pillow adjacent to Virginia. And then at that point, the pillow underneath Virginia's head spun round 90 degrees. Underneath her. Nobody was touching her. Her hands were by her side. And again, we had this rippling effect traversing the whole of the bed covers, yeah.
How scary for a child to when you think about it. I mean, when we saw the Enfield Poltergeist case, many interviews you see, Janet is being interviewed and she comes across as quite a precocious child. Virginia doesn't come across as that at all, does she? It seems like a completely different character in regards to how she reacted. Like Janet seemed to revel in the attention, whereas Virginia doesn't. This is quite a traumatised child from being ripped from her home and put into Scotland, and she's having to go through a lot of, get herself in a new environment, new friends. It's quite traumatic for her, and she hated all of this, didn't she? She didn't like this sort of attention at all from this.
No, that's correct. She was not too happy about it at all, and neither were the family. And of course, when the local Alloa Advertiser and the Alloa Journal, that's a town near Sauchie, when the newspapers got involved with it, it suddenly went not just national in Scotland, it went, national right across the UK and then international. And they were getting bombarded by press people hounding them for the story, trying to get photographs of Virginia. It got so bad that there was a young girl who looked a wee bit like Virginia. She put on Virginia's coat and ran out the school with all these hordes of pressmen following her, and it wasn't the real Janet. It was just to get Janet out the back door, so to speak, But when the father came back, because he was poo-pooing this, so he was hearing this, but when he came back, he actually saw an apple float out of a fruit bowl, and also his shaving brush floated around the bathroom. And at that point, when he saw that with his own eyes, he went, okay, yep, I believe it now. When you see it yourself. And also a Brillo pad, which was in the kitchen, came out as if someone was, an imaginary person, an invisible person was holding this Brillo pad, came floating out of the kitchen into the bedroom whilst the family were watching the television. And then on occasion, Virginia was using the Hoover. It suddenly switched itself off. So she thought maybe her mum or her dad had unplugged it, but it was still plugged in. And then the rubber part of the handle flew off. It came out of her hands. It flew off and went into the other part of the room. There was also a clock, which was in the living room cabinet. It floated off there and smashed into Virginia's face. So, I mean, this is very, very nasty. This is totally different from your normal hauntings, you know.
And there was nothing in the property before the girls got there, before Virginia got there?
Good point. As far as my research went for this latest book, they were not. The house, the street, there were not a graveyard or anything like that. You know, there was nothing really you could say maybe have caused that back in the day. All it was prior to Park Crescent being built was just fields, you know, just fields. There were nothing supernatural about the area, and certainly not a graveyard, as some people may have thought. So it was just a normal place. But what we have, the research that I did for the book uncovered that people who have since moved into that house after the Campbells moved out also have had strange paranormal experiences happening to them. Now, admittedly, not to the extent that Virginia had, but clearly there have been strange smells. There was a rippling effect on a young child who moved in 2003. Again, it's in the book. And there were, what I should say as well before I forget, there was strange writing appeared on the faces of both Virginia and her cousin Margaret. And Virginia's lips, I know it sounds crazy, but Virginia's lips appeared to glow red. But even more crazy, and I can only go by the witness testimony, I did not see this, but they said that Virginia's bed cover, which was originally green, was seen to turn a kind of mauve red colour during the course of these disturbances. And Dr. Logan, who was the GP of the child, he says that marks appeared and disappeared on Virginia's hands. And the family actually kept a diary of all these crazy events, you know. It was an extraordinary case. The sad thing is, I was only 3 at the time. I mean, I was born in 1957. This case was 1960. So I did 3 investigations of this. 1987, and one in the 1990s, and then latterly, you know, last year for the book. But thankfully, we've managed to trace former pupils who were in Virginia's class who put their hand up and says, yeah, Malcolm, hey, by Christ, we saw that as well. A lot of people have passed on. A lot of people have moved to different parts of the world, as you do. You know, that was 1960. So things have changed, yeah.
So what's it like when you go, you know, you're investigating an old case, some would say it was a cold case because it's so old now. When you actually track down somebody who witnessed that, are they prepared, you know, are they easy to talk to? They're happy to talk to you about it, or do you have to coax them to talk about it?
Well, my very first witness that I tried to get a hold of was a family member of the Campbell. Well, I should say it was an aunt of Virginia Campbell. And incredibly, she only stayed about 300-400 yards away from where I lived in Sauchie at the time, because I lived there myself for a wee while. So I tapped on the door, and the door was opened. And I said something along the lines of, sorry to disturb you, you know, my name's Malcolm Robinson. I'm doing some research on the 1960 Virginia Campbell case. And I wonder if you'd be kind enough to tell us, bang, the door was slammed in my face. I never even got my sentence out, you know. And that's the first and only time in over 40-odd years of doing this research has a door ever been firmly slammed in my face. And I just had to drop that one. But thankfully, I spoke to a number of classmates who, as I said a moment ago, backed up Virginia's testimony. We recently did a show for the BBC One show, which fingers crossed will come out next month, November. It's in the can. It should come out soon. And we interviewed Sheila Logan. That was the wife of Dr. William Logan. And she herself heard all these knockings and bangings. And you know, we said to her during the interview for the One show that, you know, you're a woman of science, or you were, of course, you're retired now. What was your take on it? Do you think you were being misled? Was Virginia up to any tricks? She says, oh, no, not at all. Virginia was a very placid young girl, Our hands were firmly by our side under the bed covers, and we could hear the knockings and bangings and the rippling of the bed covers. I saw it with my own eyes, Malcolm, as she said. And I just, as a former physician, doctor, I can't explain it. But clearly, is it spirit? Is it something else? We all have our answers. We all have our thoughts, you know.
It is a very strange one when you come across something like a poltergeist case. Very rarely do we get something like that. And obviously, it should be kept very small, the people that are involved in it. You can't have every Tom, Dick and Harry coming in to a poltergeist case. So it is very much down to the people that actually get the chance to get involved. But when you do have testimony from like people like school teachers, or you have like doctors, and you have, you know, men of the cloth, as it were, you can't. You have to, again, we're talking about sensible, rational, generally, I would say, people you can trust their credibility, you can trust what they're telling you is correct.
As much as I agree with that, I also sort of disagree as well, sitting on the fence here a bit, because if it depends on their belief system as well. If the school teacher, for example, believes in spirit, and this young girl was able to fake it in any way, then the teacher's going to be able to jump to a conclusion of spirit doing it. That's what makes a cold case really difficult to examine, because all the tests that we could do as paranormal investigators is a bit hard to do when the actual victim of the case has disappeared or moved on with their lives. Do you know what I mean? And it does make it a lot harder to investigate, because you've only got the testimony of people that have witnessed what's going on, but we can't test to see whether it's faked or not, because it happened years ago.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, cold cases are sometimes difficult to reinvestigate. It's a double-edged sword, because sometimes now with the technology you can go back to cold cases and unravel that far better, like, you know, the CSI and stuff, you know, the tests that you can do to find out who's a murderer. They've retained blood samples or something on file, and then they go back to that cold case and suddenly they've got the answers. I remember when we tried to track down Virginia, I got in touch with the Donegal newspapers to see if anybody remembers the family and where they went to. That drew a blank. Then I did some work with a newspaper down in Bedford, because I heard she had went to Bedford. I then interviewed an 82-year-old lady who somebody gave me a good lead, and I spoke to this lady, and I've got it on audio tape, and she says, "Oh, you're looking for the Campbell family?" "Yes, I know some of them. Yes, they came down from Scotland." "Oh, did you know about the ghost they had?" And I didn't mention this at the time, chaps. You know, I kept it under my hat. I said, "Oh, is that right?" "Oh, yes." She had a ghost up in Scotland, and they came down to live in Bedford. And you know what? I went, "What?" It followed her. She was getting disturbed by a poltergeist in Bedford, but the girls now moved to Kempston, Malcolm. I went, "Okay," and that's when I first realised. And she said all the correct names of the family, so I knew I had scored. I said, "Do you know where in Kempston Virginia is?" "Oh, no, sadly I don't. I only know, you know, some of the older ones, but I don't know where she is." So that's why we managed to track her down to there, down to Kempston.
It would be great to get her take on it now, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, definitely. I mean, it's just one of these things. But as I say, the strange thing is some of the residents that's now moved into that house since the Campbells moved out have experienced things as well, and it's all written up in the book. And it makes me wonder why is the event still transpiring in that house? And I should mention, not just Virginia's house. In the house 2 doors along, they've been getting ghostly stuff happening as well. So we must ask ourselves what is going on here, because poltergeist effects generally, as we all know, don't tend to last that long, you know. But this one evidently did for some bizarre reason.
And if it followed her, then why was it still in the house?
Yes, you can ask that. Maybe there's some form of residue or something that was left there, but certainly not getting back to my earlier point. I don't believe it's a sexual energy coming out. It's something else entirely. I mean, my thoughts, to be honest with you, is that it was somebody, and we can't prove this, it was somebody who had passed away in that house and just didn't want to leave, for want of a better word. This was his house, and it's like any ghost case. You're dealing sometimes, not all the time, sometimes with earthbound spirits who have passed on and they can't accept the fact that they're dead. They try to hang around and move things over or knock things out just to let the occupants of the house know that, hey, I'm still here. And what we did as a research team back in the day, our psychic would go in and try and move these earthbound spirits away and say, look, you shouldn't be here. You're causing harm and upset to the new occupants of your former home. And it sounds Hollywood, you know. There is a better place for you to go, and 9 times out of 10 it works, you know.
Yeah, so you would sort of say that this is more of a sort of a extreme sort of a traditional ghost haunting as opposed to a sort of full-fledged sort of poltergeist per se.
I know it sounds daft, but it's a bit of both, because as we know, poltergeist is more destructive. It's a German word for noisy spirit. But and a haunting is more, well, again, we have so many variations of hauntings. You have a transparent-looking ghost, you can see through them. You've got solid-looking ghosts that you could pass them in the street, and many people have, and turned around and went, I thought he was dead, and suddenly they disappear. We have ghosts that are aware of you. Ghosts that will walk through furniture or go by furniture. The anniversary ghosts of ghosts appearing on the June the 26th every year. We have you've got so many different variations of ghosts as well.
Was there any sort of manifestations of sort of like a bodily form during this Sauchie case, or was it purely sort of the more poltergeist type sort of activity, things being moved and noises, etc.?
Yeah, it's a good question as well. Simply because there was, to my knowledge, to the investigation that I've done and other people in the Sauchie case back in the day, there were no bodily visual of anybody at all, i.e. ghostly or anything else. It was purely and only the manifestations of the knockings, the bangings, the rippling of the bed covers, the pillow rotating, the events at the school, the death turning round. But no visual witnessing of what we could term an apparition.
Yeah, it does sound sort of interesting, because usually, traditionally, sort of poltergeist case, they will stick to a location. Very rarely will they sort of. I was sort of like talking with the guys the other night, like with the Enfield case. When they took the principal agent out of the house, which was Janet, it didn't seem to like follow her. I believe she went to a retreat for a little while and stuff, and sort of like the house and settled down. But it seems with this case, it actually sort of attached itself to the girl, and it would actually sort of go around with her.
It did indeed, and I also forgot, so much involved with this case, you've made me remember that not only did the events happen at school, they decided to take Virginia away from the family home to live with an auntie in the town of Dollar's in Clackmannanshire in central Scotland. It's maybe about 5-6 miles away from the town of Sauchie. Let's move Virginia to Dollar and see if things stop and we get peace and quiet. They took her to Dollar House, and you know what's coming, guys. The same thing happened. It all happened. So you're right. It was attached somehow to Virginia. She was a focal point of these bizarre experiences.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Now, you have written a book. You've referenced it several times. The Sauchie Poltergeist. God, I can't even say it now. The Sauchie Poltergeist. That's just been released on Amazon, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. It tells the full story right from the very beginnings, and we look at what was going on in the 1960s and stuff like that, and we look at the new stuff that's been brought up, the research that I've undertaken. It was mentioned briefly in one of my other books, Paranormal Case Files of Great Britain, but that was only loosely. I knew that this one case needed one standalone book about it. And so it just had to be done. And guys like me, we don't write books for money. We don't. All we're trying to do is impress upon the people of the United Kingdom and say, come on, have a look. Please, please, please have a look at this, because so many people turn their nose up at this and say, what a load of rubbish. And a lot of it may well be, but within the quagmire of all this wonderful stuff, there is these superlative cases that demand investigation, be it the cold case, be it a new case. And guys like yourselves there, Paul and Richard and Kerry, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. It's just the feeling you get in an alleged haunted building. You're there with the guys, you're there with your kit, you're there to ascertain is there any true stuff going on here, or is it all just wishful thinking and make-believe? And to try and get that, shaved away, it's just a wonderful experience. But there's still people who think it's a load of rubbish, and fair play. What can you say?
Well, you can't. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, is the old adage there. Paul, did you want to say something at that point?
No, not really. I mean, I'm just pretty much blown away by it. And it's a case that also predates the Enfield Poltergeist. And although there's similarities in both cases, they are still different.
Yeah, and I had that sort of feeling. They're the same, but different, if you know what I mean. There's so much you can put down to a poltergeist, but there's just very subtle things, what Malcolm was saying, sort of the way, I'm particularly intrigued the way that it sort of follows the girl around, which is, I believe, maybe quite rare in a poltergeist case.
Yeah. And not only that, I mean, even right down to when they moved, it followed the girl around. You don't get that in the Enfield Poltergeist.
No. They seem to be sort of it needs a location to fix itself to as well, as opposed to an individual. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the houses in the same street, guys, they had their own ghostly manifestations. It got so bad, and this is true. The family moved out the house and slept in their car. That's how bad it was. And that's in that same side of street, same street as Virginia used to stay in, yeah.
My goodness, it's definitely one that needs to be read more about, more in depth, particularly with the more up-to-date research that you've done on this particular case. But I want to move on because you've written so many other books that I can't let you go without talking about this. You've written Paranormal Case Files of Great Britain, Volume 1 and Volume 2 on this one. Of all the cases within those books, what would be one of the other cases that you think, I'm going to go back and delve a lot more deeper into?
Well, there was one big case, and like I say, I'm always sceptical with any haunted house you go into. By Christ, the people have truly, truly, truly got to prove to me that there's something real going on. And they get upset when I ask questions like, are you on any form of medication, madam? And they go, what? What are you trying to say? You've got to ask this, because sometimes people are on drugs and they can see things. But getting back to your point, and I've said it on my talks and other things, is certainly the Chingford seance and what happened there. Well, it's a big story, but very, very briefly, when we did lectures up in London, a lady came up to me and says, Malcolm, would you like to come to my house and see ghosts?
I'm sure the answer there was yes, please.
Absolutely, yes. I couldn't say yes, please, quick enough. So I went to this lady's family home, and she says, Malcolm, what's happening is later tonight we have a visiting psychic. He's going to go into trance, and lots of strange things will happen. Are you ready for this, Malcolm? And, yeah. And so she took us upstairs, and we went into one of the back bedrooms. It was devoid of any furnishings apart from a tall kind of a unit which stored, clothes, and a small chest of drawers, which we'll come back to. And she took us into another bedroom, and on this table was this little wooden and glass shelved unit. And on this was little rings and coins, and I went, what's that? Oh, that's apples, Malcolm. That falls into the seance room, and you pick them up, and they're really, really hot. Now, I was aware of apples, and I'm sure as you are as well. So that set the scene, and we went back into the other bedroom, and at the corner of the room, was a black drape. And behind that black drape was a small chair. So this visiting psychic came up, and I padded him down to make sure there were no telescope lenses or anything on his person, anything, he could conjure up tricks. He was seemed normal guy. Patted him down, he was clean. Sat him in the chair, and we strapped his arms and his legs with heavy Velcro straps to this chair because he was going to go into trance. We didn't want him jumping up and doing things. We switched there was a red ambient light, a small red light on top of this other tall wardrobe. And as soon as the lights went off, your eyes did get adjusted to the darkness. There were 4 or 5 chairs facing this curtain, and I was sitting on one of them, and I could see the people next to me in the red ambient light. I could see their contours of their body. And then just then, there was these little bells. It was tacked onto the wall, started tinkling. I went, oh yeah, who's doing that? I thought that was kind of strange. And then suddenly there was all these voices coming, male, female, young, old, from your left ear, right ear, below your legs, behind your back, in the air, 2 feet in the air, 4 feet in the air, all these voices. And I'm still not convinced. Who is throwing their voice here? I was thinking, who's doing this? Because, I'm still sceptical. And then suddenly the black cloth that the man was sitting behind punched right out. And you could see a face moulding into the fabric of this cloth. Now, the guy was still strapped down because when the cloth rose up, you could see his legs and he wasn't, so something bizarre was happening there. And then suddenly, and I've said this on other shows, etc., I don't know if you're aware of this one, but suddenly the small chest of drawers, which was sitting next to this black cloth, rose up slowly into the air of its own accord, floated across the bedroom and dropped right on my toes. And my God. And I know this sounds crazy, but this happened. A spirit voice boomed out into the room. Was Mr. Robinson impressed by this? And I stupidly said, I'd be more impressed if you took it back. So what I did was I hooked my finger under the lip of one of these chests of drawers at the top, and I said to myself, this thing is going bloody nowhere. Right, on you go. Take it back. Come on, let's have you. And nothing happened after about a minute. 2 minutes, suddenly it started to vibrate. Now, guys and gals, there were nothing either side of this small chest of drawers. Nobody was lifting it up and doing it themselves. Nobody was there because I got my arms out and I moved it to the left and moved it to the right. And suddenly I could not hold this thing anymore. It just slipped away from my finger trying to pull it back, and it floated right up into the air and went back again and came down at the other side of the room. And at that point, there was a tremendous burst of cold wind pervaded the whole room, and your breath was freezing up in front of you. I know it sounds crazy. Believe you me, I wish you were there. I truly wish you three were there. Your breath was freezing up in front of you there, and it was the most astonishing thing that I've ever seen in my life. Now, the downside of that is that prior to all that happening, the lady of the house said, I'm sorry, Malcolm, but you can't bring any video cameras, you can't do any sound recorders, you just come in as is. So whilst it's a wonderful story, I've got nothing to back it up, not a thing. And, as eyewitness testimony, this is why researchers deal with eyewitness testimony, and we all hear some wonderful stories. Are they true? Are they not true? Are they trying to get onto the television, onto the newspapers? We as researchers have to take everything with a pinch of salt, but I'll tell you what I saw that night is going to live with me forever. It was terrific.
Wow.
I know, yeah, that's kind of what my brain just did, was like, wow, and then it went down the, oh my God, that if they could do that, if that's like something that they do on a regular basis, this is like almost on a par with the skull experiment without being scientifically being documented, which is how they kind of did it. So if they could like get spirit to work with them, if they're getting that kind of activity, because they must have been sitting and having this kind of activity on a regular basis for her to come up to you in the first place and say, you want to see ghosts, come to my house. Do you know what I mean? Oh my goodness. So are you still, you must still be in contact with this lady. Tell me you followed this up.
I wish I was, Kerry. Unfortunately, the family's moved away. as I'm led to believe. And it's like one of these things with any haunted case, and new people come in and they reside in that new property. You feel like chapping on the door and say, "Excuse me, sorry to bother you, but your house was heavily haunted 6 years ago. Is it still haunted?" You can't do it.
Did you know you actually had seances going on in your back bedroom?
Well, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Yeah, it's very difficult to do that and chap somebody's door who you knows the house was haunted just to see. And I've never done it, truly. I've never really done that.
No, you have to think
So
ethically there.
I've always thought, though, if you needed to do something like that, I would canvass a few houses, send them a standard letter saying we've had reports that there's paranormal activity going on in some of the areas around here, and we just wondered if you'd experienced anything, and then put it in like the whole row of houses or something.
Rather than pinpoint that one.
Yeah, but you know exactly which address you're interested in, obviously, so you just pick the one you're interested in.
That's correct. That's a good way to do it. Yeah, definitely. And the beauty of doing these radio shows and talks and stuff is you always get somebody coming to you at the end of the talk or whatever it may be, giving you their own story. And a few months ago, I had a lady who came to me and says, "Malcolm, I work at a local hospital. I won't name it, but it's in Hastings, so it's not hard to find." And she says one of the top physicians, one of the top doctors in this hospital is signed off through stress. And I went, "Well, it's no, there's nothing the matter with that. It's a tough job." "Oh, no, you don't get it, Malcolm. He's signed off through stress of seeing something that he didn't want to see." I went, "Well, tell me more." So what she said was that he was walking down one of the hospital corridors and he saw this elderly gentleman standing next to those swing doors, and he was looking a bit out of sorts. And the doctor said to the chap, "Are you okay? Excuse me, sir, are you all right?" I think so." And then just then the doctor's pager went off, and he said, "Excuse me a moment, sir." So the doctor reached for his pager, moved away from the gentleman, and saw that he was wanted in the resus room. Now, I think with this story you may know where it's going, but there is a twist. So it turned round to speak to the gentleman, and he wasn't there. So he thought maybe he'd went through the swing doors as he attended to his pager message. So anyway, he went to the resus room, and, they've got the paddles on the chest trying to bring somebody back to life. You know what's coming. He looked down into the guy's face. Oh, my God, that was the guy he was speaking to in the corridor a moment or two ago. So here's the twist. They went to the CCTV, and he says, "Let's have a look and see what's going on here." So they rewound the CCTV back to the time when the doctor was speaking to this guy. And what did it show? It showed just the doctor walking down, stopping in the middle of the corridor, talking into midair, and that's all it showed. So, stories like that, it's wonderful, and I firmly believe in life after death simply because the evidence has been portrayed to me and shown to me throughout the years, speaking to doctors, nurses, people speaking in near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. The evidence to me, and I could be wrong, conclusively shows to me that each and every one of us will survive the death of our physical bodies. We'll see our aunts, our uncles, our mums, our dads, our brothers, our sisters in an afterlife. But is it wishful thinking or not? Some would say it is, but I don't.
What a great story that is.
You are a fantastic storyteller. I will say that. You have had me sitting on the edge of my seat pretty much all of this segment. I'm like, oh my God, I want to know more. So you do seem to be a bit of a magnet for these kind of incidences, don't you? They do seem to come to you very easy. I say come to you very easily. Do you actually scour newspapers looking for the next case or the next thing that captures your imagination, or do they just literally fall in your lap?
It's a bit of both, really. I mean, because I'm well known to some of the major papers in the UK, they'll sometimes notify me of a case, just to, not truly in the sense get involved, but to give them a kind of a talking head, so to speak. "What's your thoughts of this, Malcolm? We have a case and so, or we've got some footage of a UFO." This happens all the time. And all I can say to the news hacks is, guys, all I can give you is, looking at that video, here's what I think it is. I'm not there on the ground to tell you what it could be, but here's what I think it is. And the same with ghosts. Malcolm, this family in Brentford or whatever, or seen this ghost, and what can you tell us about it? I don't know. I'm not on the ground. I can know. So we get talk. We have these cases coming up all the time. We also get cases coming to us just off the street. Are you the guy who deals with those spooky things? Aye. Well, I've got something to tell you, and it's wonderful, and you get all these stories. People have came to me after my lectures and stuff and says, you know what? I've never told my husband about this, but I'm going to bloody well tell you, son. And they unload this wonderful story about seeing this ghost, and it's just lovely. People just want answers. We're living in the Steven Spielberg age of DreamWorks Laboratory. We laughed at John Logie Baird. That'll never work, that television. Oh, sorry, it's worked. We laughed at the Wright brothers. That'll never fly. Oh, sorry, it has flown. And because something looks and sounds ridiculous, we shouldn't laugh at it. We shouldn't laugh at it because we'll get egg in our face, and we just got to think out the box sometimes.
I totally agree with that. What's one area of this whole umbrella term of the paranormal that you really haven't got time for, that you kind of go, oh, I can't even be doing with that?
I'm not decrying it, but I'm not involved in any witchcraft or anything like that. I mean, I'm aware of quite a number of witches and people who want me to get involved with their Facebook site or come along to their skyclad meetings and what have you. I'm not knocking it at all. It's a worship of Mother God, Mother Earth. There is a good and a bad evil in this world, without a shadow of a doubt, absolutely. And there's a white witch called Kevin Caroline. He lives in St Leonard's. It's just along the road from me in Hastings. Wonderful guy. And actually, he is the Lord Protector of Loch Ness, getting back to Nessie. And he's a wonderful chap. But it's a kind of area which I wouldn't get involved with. I would love to do more work on Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Nessie, the cryptozoology field side of things. I've given lectures on 9/11. Did it happen the way it was portrayed? We've done lectures on a whole range of different things, but probably one of the main lectures that I love and enjoy giving is the ghostly photographs, where I put up on PowerPoint, bang, bang, bang. Here's what I think is the best photographs. But photographs, as we know, can be manipulated, they can be manufactured, but the same technology can unmask that. So if somebody's got a UFO hanging by a very, very thin thread from a tree, that new technology can clearly show, wait a minute, there's a line coming down here. So it works both ways. It can manufacture fakes, but it can also, we can uncover fakes.
Oh, that's true. That's very true. And I think, going on the photograph thing, one of the first photographs I came across as in regards to the paranormal was the brown lady of Raynham Hall, which we now know is something quite prosaic, but that's what interested me. That's what got me, involved and interested from a very young age. It was very evocative. And I think we all have that image, don't we, of, an age-old image where we can go, that kind of really sparked that inspiration of what is it? It's supernatural, it's scary. So they are very important in their own right, but there is so much out there now, isn't there, in the paranormal field? Yeah, and what we have to be careful of is something called simulacrum or pareidolia, and what that means is people seeing faces in the clouds in the sky and thinking it's something else, or in the trees it looks like a face, or even in your own kind of carpet looks like a face. The human brain is hardwired to manufacture images of facial reconstruction. Even as a young baby, we look at our mother's face as she's holding us, trying to get that. So we have to be careful. A lot of photographs that's submitted to SBI are just purely pareidolia. It's just, light and dark and shade and stuff like that. It looks like a ghost, but it's not. It's the angle where the sun is hitting the limb of the tree, creating this patch on the grass. It looks like a ghost. So, but there are far, far, far too many people out there willing to believe in these things willy-nilly without truly, truly digesting and looking at it carefully and honestly and respectively. It sometimes infuriates me that people just, show me a photograph or look at this and it's nothing to do with a ghost. But yeah, that's just me. It's a little bugbear of yours. So what? Sorry. Yeah. What tips would you give to anybody that's going into a case or looking to research an older case? What kind of tips would you give people when they're looking at older stuff or even a new case?
Well, mostly it would probably be the same as any given researcher here in the UK or the States. First and foremost, you've got to keep your wits about you. You've got to document either by writing it down or a little handheld recorder, anything at all that you feel is mysterious. If you have a team of 6 people in a haunted house, obviously you've got to break that up into 2 people in different bedrooms. You stay there for maybe 20, 30, 40 minutes and then time check that, then go back to a central room to see what you get. Everybody must be honest. Everybody must be so quiet, because you'll hear the house settling down of an evening, the water coming through the pipes, the wood in the floor contracting and creaking. We all know that, the house is just settling down for the night. As far as equipment, yes and no. And maybe, there's so many devices now since I was a lad during the war that's now out there to allegedly detect ghosts and spirits. Some are okay, some are, I don't know, I don't think they're worth their salt. So certainly use them if you feel that they're good for you. What we do is always bring in a psychic medium, a qualified, really good psychic who can tune in, because the psychic world is like an old radio, not the DAB radio. So you just move the dial, move it radio 1, radio 2. You're tuning in. These psychics are tuning into a frequency that most people can't perceive, like dogs and cats can hear louder, they can hear a different frequency. So we always bring in a gifted psychic to really tune in and see what she's getting. And then, what happens with us is in the morning, because the family let us give us free rein to the house. In the morning, when the family come back, they say, "What did you get? Did you get anything?" And your psychic will say, "Well, we got the consistent name of Harry Radcliffe, or can you take that?" And they'll obviously either say no or yes. So that's a good source. But getting back to the main point is just be very observant, be very careful, make sure you know where everybody else is in the house, and catalogue as much as you possibly can. Catalogue what is in the area prior to the building. Was it an old site? Was it a war grave? Was there a battle on there back in the day? Try and see if that comes into play as well. And just keep your wits about you and do the very best you can, and provide that information reliably to any main, if you've got a big company, give that to them and put that out, digest that out into the media, so to speak. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah, it does.
Totally. It's pretty much what most people try to do, isn't it, when they go out investigating these days? And they try. That's all I can say.
At the end of the day, we're just trying to get that evidence and put that out. The sad thing is, people like myself and my colleagues wish more and more scientists would become involved in this arena, because it would help our cause a lot more. But a lot of scientists do not want to touch this with a barge pole, simply because of their fellows saying, "You're what? You're getting involved with the poltergeist?" And it's such a shame, that there is a lot of scientists who are looking at it, yes, admittedly, but there is still not enough scientists for me who are not looking at this with honest eyes and trying to look at this, because we can't laugh at these things anymore. There's no denying that these things happen, and we're only trying to get answers.
Well, the problem is, isn't it, is you haven't experienced yourself, like, the ching for the seance for yourself. All these years later, you must be still thinking, how did that happen? Why did, how it's the how's, why's, what's, when's, who's, when's, where, isn't it? Kind of scenario of like trying to make sense of that for yourself, but you can't, because obviously you've not got access to that location anymore. But it's that knowledge, isn't it, of that happened to me. I can't explain it. So you try to explain it. That leads you off down, from where we started with this, which was like the Dechmont Woods incident, that came off the back of something else, and it leads you down these rabbit holes, doesn't it?
Yeah, all we're trying to do is get that evidence, and you're quite right. Sometimes we don't have it, so all we can do is come on shows like your good selves there to tell your listeners about these cases, do it in lectures or put it in books. When I'm dead and buried, long and gone, at least somebody may look at any of these cases that I've done and maybe do a cold case or look at it in different eyes, maybe come up with a different answer. Because at the end of the day, all we're trying to be as human beings is try and leave, to a degree, a mark on this planet. You know, people go about just humdrum lives and stuff like that. I'd like to think that, you know, my research and my colleagues' research and some of the notable people in the paranormal world will be looked at in 50 years' time and saying, by God, that guy he was right, you know. But it's all about perception and getting answers.
I agree with that. Right, boys, anything you'd like to ask before we let our lovely Malcolm go?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything that we wanted to talk about, really. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating show. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Malcolm, where can people go to find more about yourself, and where, more importantly, where can they get your books?
If they go to Amazon, and you'll see my books there, just type in Malcolm Robinson, author. They should spring up there. I'm also available to chat on Facebook as well. And I'm happy to hear from any of your listeners who's got any story at all. It will be treated in confidence. We are not experts. We can only give you our interpretation of what may be going on. If you have an ongoing case, any of your listeners, I'm more than happy to assist in that as well. And but all I can say in closing is truly, you know, do the research, read the books. There's a lot of nonsense out there. Yes. But within that, this is why Malcolm Robinson here today is in October 2020 is still on that path, is still walking down that path to get answers. And I just hope that your listeners get more involved in that. Keep listening to your show, by the way.
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you.
Most definitely. All I can say is I cannot wait to receive my copy of the Sauchie Poltergeist. It's a fascinating case. I'm really looking forward to reading that particular book, so I can't wait to get that one. I'm going to have to get in touch with the post office and say, where is it? Great. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us today. It's been absolutely fascinating. Can you come back another time, please, Malcolm? Because we've literally only covered like the outside edges of your work, really.
Yes, I'd be happy to come on. I mean, I've got so many more cases to talk about during the course of over 40 years. Undoubtedly, there's a few cases to talk about. So I'd be more than happy. But it's been a great pleasure. Kerry, Paul and Richard, thank you very, very much for having me here this evening. And I wish you every success with the programme, and long may it continue.
Thank you so much. Well, as you can see, Malcolm is an absolute authority on lots of different areas in the paranormal. Definitely worth going and checking out all of his books, available on Amazon. As always, we will share the link onto the Paranormal Concept Facebook page for when, you know, like, so you can go and find it out for yourself. And the Sauchie Poltergeist, I'll get it right in a minute, is an absolutely fascinating case. And if it's not a poltergeist case you've come across, then it's definitely one you should be checking out. On that note, we've come to the end of the show. So, guys, what do we say at this point?
Good night, guys.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
At Ring, we reinvented the doorbell. And now we're changing the way you look at whole home protection with Ring security cameras.
Wait, Ring does cameras too?
That's right. And they're so versatile, you can put them inside or outside, wherever you need them most.
Handy.
Ring cameras let you see, hear and speak to anyone inside or outside your home. And you can control them all from the Ring app to keep you and your family connected and protected.
Now that is smart.
Ring. Smart security made simple. Learn more at ring.com.